So let's talk about that mob for a second, because I sense that both sides right now are being led by their mob. I see it more on the left, but I do see it on the right as well, that just the hysterical people who have all the magical answers, who have, if it was only their messiah, so the hysterical people on the right, they have their messiah in office right now, but the hysterical people on the left, that if they only had Bernie, it would all be okay. The middle, it's hard to get that middle mob to get going, right?
It was very difficult to be deeply committed to moderation. So Yeats has that poem where he says the worst are full of passionate intensity, while the best lack all conviction. Because you're thinking, well, this is actually hard. There's a bunch of people that think it's not hard. They know exactly what to do. And politics, if it's going to work, needs to have rules, institutions, constitutions that prevent them from being able to control the government. And that's the genius of what our Constitution has done, that separation of powers. I understand it's really frustrating because it means that you feel strongly, there seems to be majority in favor of it, and yet we still can't do it because the president doesn't go along, the Supreme Court doesn't go along. It means that a lot of times the status quo is privileged, but the alternative is to have a mob. And Plato, when he thought of democracy, actually talked about too much liberty means that you've got the butlers that are drunk on liberty's heady wine.
Right.
And that they'll say, if they find a leader who doesn't give them too much, they'll call them blackguards and oligarchs, that you should do exactly what we want. Well, they don't actually know what they want. So we have a real problem and this is an interesting paradox in democracy. There was a famous Englishman that said the reason that we put our leaders' heads on stamps is that we can thumb their noses and lick their hinder parts. So we have both of those attitudes towards leaders. We want them to be better than us and to do what we say.
Yeah. Is part of this also that we think that we need to get our morals from our leaders too? And maybe that's changing a little bit with Trump, but that we thought that, they always want you're going to be married, you're going to have the perfect family, we're going to show you the kids. We know that it's always a fraud and they're all cheating on their wives and doing all sorts of awful things. But that we've tried to make our politicians into be perfect humans, which again is the Messiah thing you're talking about, but it's just show.
Sure. It's difficult. We have other things. There's basketball to watch, there's baseball, there's picnics to go on. We don't really want to have to watch politicians very closely. And so we substitute. I was really surprised at this, how little voters knew or cared about actual issues. The issue that I, as a political scientist, I want to talk about that.
Right.
They're going, I gotta go. I'm really not interested in that at all. Oh, but it's an important issue. Yeah, I'm out. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What they're interested in instead is your character. So if your character is very much like them, it means that you'll go off and when they're not watching, they'll do what they would have done. You will do what they would have done.
Right.
And so they want you to know, are you like me in terms of core values?
Yeah.
And that's why family and things like that matter, is that you're a good person. Now, the problem is...
But Trump is a strange misnomer in that, isn't he?
He said the things that many white people believed. Trump won a majority of white women. I think that's the single most astonishing fact about this election. Trump won a majority of white women. And the reason is that the Democrats, for reasons that I have a hard time understanding, mostly campaigned on a platform of white people suck. You guys are privileged. And there's all sorts of reasons why actually you can say that that's true, but as a political strategy, it didn't work. And so Clinton, when she said, how am I not ahead by 50 points?
Yeah.
It's amazing that they didn't recognize that they had actually to appeal to a majority of Americans, not to try to put together a coalition of disparate interest groups that are united by nothing except the promise that they're going to get paid off.
So that goes directly to social justice, which I talk about all the time. I assume you see this as a pretty big threat to the way our political system should work, right? It sounds good, social justice, but in reality, it's creating these competing interests that have to sort of knock each other down a peg.
We're all in favor of justice, and social justice means that we have a system that works. I see social justice as the claim that there shouldn't be any unearned privilege. And to the extent that people think they've been denied something, that's where this social justice warrior impulse comes from. And it's particularly interesting being on college campuses to see what social justice warriors have done where they won't even allow other people to speak. So there's the broad problem of free speech and social justice, and then the problem on college campuses that I have to deal with often personally, the social justice warriors and academic freedom, which is a little bit different from freedom of speech. Academic freedom is a different concept, but the social justice impulse, to the extent that it's, a number of people have said, but I think Milton Friedman said it, if you take money from A and give it to B, it's likely B will vote for you. That doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. You're just campaigning with other people's money.
Yeah.
And so all of us are clever. We can come up with reasons why you should get something and you should get something and you should get something. But at some point you run out of other people's money.
Yeah. And you've just split now this thing into a gajillion other things. So discussing this on the campus front, how bad is it on campuses right now? I talk to professors all, in all sorts of different disciplines, and almost everybody says it's pretty terrible.
I'm really spoiled because I'm at Duke. So, I mean, you probably heard about how bad Charles Murray's visit to Duke was. Probably didn't, because it was fine. We had Charles Murray in.
Oh wait, which was the one? So you got me there.
Yes.
Which was the one that was the whole fiasco?
That's the thing. Well, there was a number of places that Charles Murray tried to go
okay.
that have turned out really badly. He came to Duke. There were 3 idiots with vuvuzelas, and the room was quiet. You couldn't even hear it.
Yeah.
It was fine. People asked some questions. In fact, I asked that they ask more rude questions. He's a grown-up. He's happy to answer aggressive, rude questions. So I think that the answer is, I have an odd view probably. I'm a big fan of safe spaces.
Yeah, so you wrote, I wanted to ask you about it. So you wrote a piece on Learn Liberty in defense of safe spaces, which as I read it, you parse it to a point that actually makes some sense to me because I'm not a safe space guy, so take it away.
Well, it's an attempt at judo. Obviously, I'm using safe space in a way where people who are in favor of safe spaces, they go, wait, what?
Right. So you kind of flip it. So can you explain that a little bit?
To me, the main principle universities are operating on is not freedom of speech, where you can say anything you want, but academic freedom, which means that you can go off into little groups and be insulated from people that you disagree with so you can work on something. So the political scientists are working on something in a particular way. Sociology is working on something in a particular way. We have communities of scholars that work on things, and in our talks there's a bunch of things that are shared premises, shared assumptions, and we're going to try to advance without constantly having to confront all of the other possible ways of thinking about this.
Right. So you're describing that as a safe space. But I feel like that's not exactly what the like, I don't know that many people would argue that that isn't okay, right? Even the people that are for safe spaces.
Well, but then we can go on to raise the question. And Van Jones has this amazing video where he makes exactly the right argument, I think. What you cannot do is annex the entire university as a safe space. You cannot say, I want to be all across the university safe from anything that I disagree with. So that it's the very fact that there's these different safe spaces that nearly ensure there's going to be somebody working on things you totally disagree with. And they have to be safe within that space. You don't get to prevent them from doing that. So I think we need safe spaces, for examples, for fraternities. And that's the safe space people are, fraternities are terrible.
They hate fraternities,
No, people need to be able to come up with associations. So there's 5 freedoms that are guaranteed in the First Amendment. And we forget freedom of association. Freedom of association means I get to choose the people that I hang out with. And if I want to have a club or organization and we have rules, and we want to talk about the stuff we want to talk about and having the speakers that we want, even if it's Milo, okay.
but people seem to be lost on this. I mean,
They're confused.
I see even with the guests that we choose here, if I choose one person, someone will love me for a year, then I put on one person who they don't like, suddenly they prescribe all of that person's beliefs onto me.
Yeah.
I go, well, I was just asking them questions.
And listening to the answers, and you can either turn it off or maybe you'll learn something.
Yeah.
So John Stuart Mill has this great idea of education where he says it requires collision with error. And the way I try to explain it to people is, and I think this happens much more on the left, that a lot of the young students on the left have just learned one-move chess openings. They move the pawn in front of their king out 2 spaces. And then they're patted on the head until, good liberal, here's a cookie.
Yeah.
And somebody knows a 5-move chess opening in response, they're really upset. Can you do that? Well, you must be a bad person. And in fact, we're going to prevent that because I don't know why your argument is false. The only possible explanation is that it's evil.
Yeah, is that you're a racist, bigot, homophobe, et cetera.
Because they've never actually had to confront people that they disagreed with.
Yeah.
So collision with error means that you're constantly trying to improve your own views, because if you find someone you disagree with, one of 2 things is true. Either you're right, but you don't know the reasons, and you should think about it, because not knowing the reasons is a lot like not knowing the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Memorizing some catechism of truths is not what college is about. It's learning reasons and being able to reason critically.
Yeah.
You can't do that unless you know the best argument against your position. So one of the things that I'm pretty judgmental about this, I'll ask people, that's an interesting claim. What do you think is the best counter argument to that? And if they say, well, there isn't one, we're done. You don't know anything.
Yeah.
But if they say, you know, there's actually 2 that I have a real problem with, and I think I can answer them, but they're interesting arguments, that person's an intellectual.
Yeah, it's funny because some of my best moments, you can see the way I interview, and I haven't looked down at the notes once, and I'm trying to hear you and just go where it feels natural. But some of my best moments on the show, I think, are where someone has pinned me into thinking, wait a minute, I really have to reevaluate something,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how you evolve, and that's how most of us are, and yet we've so let go of that in the public
And
square.
I think some of it's generational. A lot of the young students just have never thought about the problem of having to learn by arguing. So one of the things that I do in class, and it worked better than I thought, was I divide the students into pairs, and they have to choose a question they're going to debate. And then on the day of the debate, the debates are 30 minutes. On the day of the debate, both of them hold up big-ass yellow dice, because there's not enough ritual in our lives.
Right.
So you have to hold the dice over your head, and you roll it, and whoever gets the higher roll gets to choose which side they're on.
I
So
like
you don't
that.
know which side you're arguing until that moment.
Yeah, how does that go?
They love it, because they pay much more attention now to things they disagree with, because they want to understand it. They may have to argue it.
Do you find that sometimes the ones that are arguing things they don't believe actually do a better job because of that?
Because
like they're actually they have to do more intellectual work.
And they're not so emotional, where I have an attachment to a particular position. It's hard for me to explain it because I just know it's right.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's an argument I don't agree with, I'm thinking of it logically, step by step, and I'm presenting evidence. So, and a lot of times they end up saying, well, I've kind of got to change my mind. That's not really what I believed after all. Or at least I can see why someone would believe the opposite. That's what education is.
Yeah. So it sounds like your situation at Duke is pretty good, and maybe they've managed to figure out the free speech thing a little bit better than most universities.
Duke is really committed to it. And the thing is, it's not a very hard thing to commit to. So our previous president, Nan Cohen's the best college president I've ever seen. And there was an incident where David Horowitz had bought this ad about how reparations for slavery were racist. And you know, it was pretty incendiary, and I didn't like the ad. I thought it was out of line. But the newspaper, the Duke Chronicle, had allowed David Horowitz to purchase a one-page ad. Now, he had done that in a number of newspapers. He did it at Brown University. At Brown University, they had a ceremonial burning of the newspapers on the steps of the admin building in which the president participated. That's horrible.
Yeah.
At Duke, what Nan Cohen said was, it's a newspaper. You want to buy an ad, go ahead.
Right.
That's not a very hard position to take. It's a newspaper. I might not have taken that ad as editor. I'm not editor. You want to contest it, buy an ad.
So do you think the students or the faculty or whatever it was at Brown, when they do that sort of thing, do you think they realize that they ultimately strengthen the ideas that they're going up against? So for example, I've had David Horowitz on the show. I think he's a decent guy. I agree with him on some stuff. You know, he was a former leftist, and I think 30 years ago was struggling with a lot of the issues that I'm thinking about these days. But basically I sat across from him, I thought, he's a decent guy. I didn't think he was some right-wing maniac or all the things that they say about him. So that when they then burn the newspapers or whatever, and then now you have people doing a little research on him, and then they may go, well, this isn't all crazy what he's saying, but look at the reaction to him.
Well, the one alternative would be look in the newspaper and say, oh, geez, and turn the page.
Right, that would be the sane reaction.
You wasted all that money because
Yeah.
you're not persuaded by it. You did, oh, boy.
Yeah, as if people are paying that much attention to newspaper ads,
Well, they did after the administration at Brown burned it. That got so much attention.
Yeah.
So if nothing else, it certainly does validate two claims. One, the university is not capable of holding legitimate discussions or confrontations with ideas you disagree with. And the other is, I'm going to look at this ad and see what it says because it's pretty controversial.
Yeah. So we've gone about 50 minutes, and we really haven't done that much on economics. So I want to shift a little bit. Because to me it seems that economics, if we could get the economic system to work right, whatever that means, that it does resolve a lot of the political things. Basically, if people have jobs and can, buy some stuff and feel that they own property and things of that nature, that those other things will become less important. That's my basic belief. Do you think that's a fair premise to start off with?
It's interesting that so many things are going on at once because the most recent magazine, John Nye at George Mason University, has this brilliant article about inequality. So it is true that if you look at income levels, there's more inequality. Mm-hmm. And the reason is there's more rich people, and the rich have gained by more than the poor. Mm-hmm. But the poor have gained a lot. So, but let's compare this to 1800. In 1800, the mode of transportation of the wealthy was very different from the poor. Now, if I'm really rich, maybe I have a Tesla, and you have a Dodge minivan.
Chevy Equinox, leased.
It's not that different, really. It has air conditioning. It works pretty well. It gets, the Tesla gets good gas mileage, I guess. But there's some sort of status difference. But
we're basically doing the same thing.
We're the same.
Yeah.
We've got an internet connection at home. We've got a nice television. We've got a computer. We've got a laptop. We've got a cell phone. There are some differences in status. But there's never been more equality in the basic way that people live their lives. Mm-hmm. And the difference in, if you look at the difference in life expectancy between the wealthy and the poor, it used to be enormous. Mm-hmm. Child mortality rates, it was enormous. It's converged. Our biggest problem is not starvation, it's obesity. So there has never been a time of greater equality.
Now, I know some people are going to hear that and go, you libertarians, what he's saying is you people on the bottom have a TV, have a cell phone, what about the people that don't have that stuff? Now, I get what you're saying, that most of the bottom has sort of moved up to have a decent level. But what about that other? What's the libertarian view of how you help or not help the people that don't have that baseline?
Two things. One, when historians look back at the period between 1945 and 2010, the great story is the worldwide elimination of poverty through capitalism. Every country that has chosen markets has dramatically improved, not just the average, but the least well-off. China, India, poverty is disappearing around the world, if by poverty you use some objective measure. Mm-hmm. If you have a subjective or comparative measure, yes, it's a problem. Because there's always going to be 1/5 of the people in the bottom 20%. That's just a definition.
I'm not a mathematician, but I can go with you on that. Yeah.
So that's one thing, is that allowing markets solves poverty in a way that no government program ever could. It's better to have a job than a handout. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I have written quite a bit about my own support for universal basic income. Mm-hmm. So I think universal basic income is a better solution than the hodgepodge of different intrusive programs that we have now. And let me explain briefly why. So what we have is a system, and I wrote a pretty incendiary paper about this. The state is a bad polygamist. So if you're a single mother and you have 3 children if you do one of two things, you'll lose your support from the polygamist. If you get a job or get married. If you actually do something that achieves some independence for yourself, your husband, the state, will no, we're getting a divorce.
Right.
I don't care. I mean, you can have more children, you can have affairs, but you have to be committed to me. You can only get support from me, which means that you can't do any of the things that normally we would expect, and this is a conservative position, I
Right.
suppose. Family and jobs are good things. Being married and having a job is a good thing. We have what many people, even on the left, have called the cliff effect of benefits. If I'm in Section 8 housing and I get subsidies for food, I get subsidies for school, the first $10,000 that I earn costs me $12,000 in benefits. So the poor aren't lazy, they're rational.
Right. So they're really, it's just a realistic game. Not, I don't want to say game. They're not playing a game, but they're making calculations.
It's a game in the technical sense.
Yeah.
They have choices, they have strategies, those have payoffs.
Yeah.
It's unsurprising they pick the ones that make them better off because they're desperate. They can't afford to lose this money.
So, for example, if you're living through subsidized housing in a decent area with a decent school, and even if you don't want those handouts, well, then you realize, well, I'm going to have to work a third job now, and then they're going to force me to move to a much worse place to live.
I can't afford childcare. So the state is a bad polygamist. Let's stop doing that. And let's say, another problem as I see it is minimum wage. Now the effects of minimum wage on overall employment, economists debate. But it's almost certainly true that it's very difficult for people to get a first job or acquire the experience that allows them to start the staircase to the American dream. So the unemployment rate in some urban areas for like 15 to 25-year-olds is 40, 50%. There's no way for people to find a first job. Why do we do that? Well, we want to say people should be able to live on this. It's not clear why your first job should be something you should be able to live on.
Yeah, and if you even bring that up, people get upset. Right?
Well, except I say, you're right. Let's make sure they can live. Let's give them universal basic income. And if they want to get a job at $3 an hour, because that's how you get experience, in Europe, in Germany, if you serve an apprenticeship, you're making $2 or $3 an hour. After 2 years, you have enough experience, you can now get a job that makes $30 an hour. So it's an education. So to me, universal basic income that's given without strings, we take the money that we're spending now, which is enough to give at least $12,000 per poor people. So you take the amount that we spend, divide it by the number of
Where are we taking that from?
Well, all of these different subsidy programs.
Oh, so all of the subsidy programs then go to...
So we including Social Security. So we eliminate all those.
Yeah.
Use that money to give everyone a universal basic income. And if they get a job, they don't lose it. If they get married, they don't lose it. They can use it for childcare. One of the problems that people have now is it's very specifically tied to a location. So I can't go somewhere where there's a job because I won't be able to establish myself. Universal basic income, if it's federal, means that if I'm living in Cleveland, Ohio, I can't find a job, and there are jobs in Texas or North Carolina. When I get there, I get universal basic income. I can establish myself, I can pay for childcare, I can look for a job, and there actually are jobs in those places.
Yeah. Do you find a conflict between your libertarian self and your economist self on this? Because it seems like the idea, a libertarian going, the state should give people money, probably seems like there's some fight there, right?
Sure, if you're a destinationist. If I'm a directionalist, I say, dude, we're giving them the money now.
Right, we're already doing it.
We're already doing it. Let's just give the money in a way that's cheaper and increases liberty. That's the basic directionalist argument, which is why Milton Friedman and Charles Murray are both in favor of universal basic income. But it has to be a directionalist argument. We're already doing that. Now you're saying we shouldn't do that. Great, good for you. We are. And unless you have some plan to end that and improve things, I'll listen to that.
Right.
That's not what they say. They just say, well, the government shouldn't be giving out any money. It already is. Let's do it in a more efficient way. And in a way that increases liberty. Because I can then spend that money on what I actually want. We give these vouchers for food, which I don't really want to buy that. I want to buy something else. I sell my food stamps for 50 cents on the dollar. If I get money, I already have 100 cents on the dollar. Now, the one objection that people on the left make is, well, those poor people, you know how they are. They'll spend it on the wrong stuff. So one of the
Is
things,
that the argument that people on the left make? I think that isn't that usually from the right, where they'll say, well, they're going to spend it on booze.
of course,
or,
some people, but
Yeah.
a surprising number of people
Really?
on the left believe that. Yes.
Huh.
So one of the things I like about this is it sort of divides the usual political split by how paternalistic they are. There's a whole bunch of people on the left that really think experts and honestly rich white people should be saying, here's how these poor people should be spending their time and money.
Yeah, which is probably not. Well, that shows you a lot about paternalism and authoritarianism and all that. So your next book, which is called Tomorrow 3.0, this is sort of partly what it's going to be about, right? Because that we're about to go into another revolution, which is going to be a shared economy and technological revolution. And that all sort of plays into, I suppose, basic income and just the way technology is, just, iPads are replacing people at McDonald's. This is just a fact.
It's interesting. So Mark Andreessen in November 2011 wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal in which he said software eats the world. And what he meant was that software is to service jobs as robots and automation are to production. So we're used to thinking of factories as being a transformation from a bunch of people putting stuff together to machines putting stuff together. And it's more efficient, but it means there's fewer jobs. So capitalism almost always reduces jobs by increasing productivity. And so Trump was wrong in saying that we're sending jobs to China. The whole world is losing jobs to productivity, and that's good because consumer products are reduced in price, and it means that we're all wealthier. The reason that almost everyone can afford a car and a cell phone is that the price of those things has fallen so much. Problem is, until now we've said, well, there's always the service economy. People can always get service jobs. They can't, and that's being hastened by the push for increased minimum wages. So in Seattle, for example, if you have a fast food restaurant, you're probably investigating kiosks so you don't have to pay $15 an hour to have some guy who really isn't worth $15 an hour at the front desk.
Right.
So the service jobs are going to be taken over by software. It's not clear to me that we're going to be able to take people who are not sufficiently well trained by the state education system to be able to work in the new economy to make that transition very quickly. So I think universal basic income, you can make a static argument. We're spending the money already, so we might as well spend it more efficiently. But then there's a dynamic argument too. Over time, the move to the sharing economy probably benefits most of us.
Yeah.
Because we can rent rather than own. Prices are going to fall dramatically. We'll need a lot less stuff.
The sharing economy, just for the people that don't fully get it. So basically, that you wouldn't even have to necessarily own your car. That all of the things that we kind of have, we'd figure out better ways to use them, so you wouldn't have to fork out as much money for them in the first place. And we'd figure out, well, I'm going to use it on Tuesdays at this time, and you're going to use it then. And
well, the example,
is that the basic?
Sure.
Yeah.
The example that I always use, and I think people recognize it, is I have a black BMW 330i, and I'm just the sort of person you think I am, that drives a black BMW 330i, zooming in and out.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive car. I park it at a special shrine at my house. When I approach it, the door opens. Now, it's a garage, but that's pretty expensive storage. And since I worked as an administrator at Duke for a long time, I have the parking space of God.
Yeah.
I can park in a great space. So my car is really expensive, and it's always taking up two pieces of real estate, the garage and my parking space at Duke, which is reserved for me. When you multiply that by I drive my car 30, 40 minutes a week. All the rest of the time it's just sitting there. I think what's going to happen 50 years from now is that people are going to look back and be astonished at the extent to which we were so selfish that we wanted to keep stuff so other people couldn't use it, and spend a lot of money storing it so other people couldn't use it. Now, to some extent, that gives us status. I'm an old guy. I probably have pictures of my pathetic car on Facebook. Young people don't do that. They're more interested in accumulating experiences than they are stuff. So I think that there's a cultural shift towards a sympathy towards not having such a big impact on the environment, reducing your footprint. So if a car is constantly in use, instead of sitting in my garage or a parking space all the time, we'll need far fewer of them. We'll be able to have bike lanes because we won't need to have all this parking space. We won't need to have closets or storage units where we have all this crap that we don't even need.
Yeah.
Storage units are pretty amazing. You have all this stuff that you're not using.
And you never go there.
Well, but somebody else could be using it. The
Right.
reason that they're not using it is that it's too difficult for you to find that other person.
Yeah.
Software is going to change our ability to find someone to share it with.
Do you find a little bit that that can be at odds with individualism? That you're not saying that you wouldn't have the right to own things, right?
Of course.
That's not the end conclusion of this.
Most people, I think, want the use of something. And in our current system, owning it is the cheapest way to have something available to use. But it's fairly common for, I have a tuxedo, I don't wear it very often. Many women have gowns that they wear maybe once. Now the reason that they don't rent the gown is that it's too difficult to find it in exactly their size.
Mm-hmm.
But suppose you had an app that could take computer laser measurements and get exactly the right measurement, and it's delivered to you 2 days from now. And instead of an $800 gown that you wear once, it's a $100 rental, and it's a designer gown. That would be great.
Yeah. So everything's changing, I think, is the theme of this hour. There's a lot changing politically, there's a lot changing economically, and we just got to be smart enough to hopefully not, go totally off the ditch as we're navigating it.
I'm mostly optimistic because I think our institutions are pretty strong, and people recognize that there's a problem. The social media, the internet, access to software all create disruptions. But when you look at human history, a lot of the best things have happened after a period of disruption. But the period of disruption can be pretty bad. The 1840s and 50s in Europe, cities were on fire because of the Industrial Revolution. The result was mostly good. So it's not clear to me what's going to happen, which again is one of the reasons I'm for universal basic income. Let's make sure that those who are least well off and who are through no fault of their own find themselves not able to work in the traditional manufacturing jobs that they expected to be there. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure that there's some minimum on how bad off they are.
Yeah, I love the framing of that because it really is an argument that transcends the left-right thing because you're hitting them both at their soft spots. So it's got a nice ability to get some people to come together.
Well, we'll see.
That's how you end the show. For more on Dr. Munger, follow him on Twitter. Maybe you'll respond, right? Oh, you do respond sometimes, and you wrote a nice piece on Learn Liberty about how when every now and again you have an experience that actually changes.
Again, I'm positive.
There you go. Follow Dr. Munger on Twitter. It's @Mungowitz.